I never thought a single declined phone call would be the catalyst for reclaiming my life. My name is Morgan, and 6 weeks ago, my father left a voicemail that still echoes in my mind. We need to talk about Ethan's situation. It's urgent. 27 missed calls later, I finally answered, only to discover my golden child brother had burned through not only his inheritance and my college fund, but had also accumulated over $300,000 in debt that my parents couldn't handle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment I should have recognized the pattern that would define the next decade of my life. It was a crisp October afternoon in Portland, the kind where amber leaves carpeted the sidewalks and the scent of pumpkin spice wafted from every cafe. I was 16, clutching my first acceptance letter from Reed College, my dream school since childhood. Mom and Dad had gathered us in the living room for what they called a family financial summit. These meetings were typically formalities, where they'd present decisions already made as though they were seeking our input. The heavy walnut coffee table between us held spreadsheets, calculators, and the college brochures I'd collected over years of methodical research and planning. "Morgan," Dad began, his voice carrying that practiced gentleness he used when delivering disappointment packaged as wisdom. "We need to discuss your college expectations. Reed is ambitious. The tuition alone would stretch us thin." I nodded, prepared for this conversation. "I've researched scholarships, and with the college fund you've been building since I was born, we should be able to cover most of it. I can work part-time for expenses." The glance my parents exchanged lasted only a second, but it contained volumes. Mom's fingers began fidgeting with her wedding ring, her tell when uncomfortable truths hung in the air. "Honey," she said softly, "there have been some adjustments to the college fund situation." That's when Ethan, my brother, 18 months, my senior and eternally bathed in the golden light of parental preference, strolled in from lacrosse practice. He tossed his premium sports bag onto the couch and grabbed an apple from the decorative bowl Mom refreshed daily. "What's happening?" he asked, though his tone suggested minimal interest in whatever family discussion he'd interrupted. Dad straightened, his demeanor shifting subtly. "Perfect timing. We were just explaining to Morgan about the college funds." Ethan bit into the apple with theatrical nonchalance. "About my business investment?" The word investment hit me like ice water. I looked between my parents, searching for signs that this was some elaborate misunderstanding. "What investment?" I asked, though something in me already knew. Dad cleared his throat, adopting his boardroom voice, the one he used when logic needed to override emotion. "Your brother has been offered an extraordinary opportunity with Patterson Tech Ventures. They rarely accept entrepreneurs his age, but they see exceptional potential in his app development skills." Mom jumped in, her enthusiasm too manufactured to be convincing. "It's a startup incubator program, Morgan. Very competitive. Ethan's been accepted with his social networking concept for college athletes." "Athlete Connect," Ethan corrected, scrolling through his phone. "The program requires participants to demonstrate financial commitment," Dad continued. "We've decided to reallocate funds to support this venture. It's an investment in his future." The careful avoidance of directly mentioning my college fund hung between us, but the implication was unmistakable. "You're using my college fund for Ethan's app idea?" I asked, my voice smaller than intended. "We're consolidating family educational resources," Dad replied, as if renaming the betrayal made it more palatable. "Ethan's venture has potential returns that could benefit everyone, including funding your education later." I remember staring at the Reed College brochure on the table, the Gothic architecture and tree-lined paths that had populated my dreams for years. How much is left for me? Another glance between my parents. Mom's ring twisting intensified. "We believe in diversified approaches to education," Dad said, which wasn't an answer. "How much?" I repeated. "About $1,200, Mom finally admitted, unable to meet my eyes. The room tilted slightly. $1,200 wouldn't cover even a single course at Reed, or practically anywhere else. Years of assumed promise evaporated in an afternoon. "This is temporary," Dad assured me. "Athlete Connect has massive potential. Once it launches, we'll replenish your fund and then some." Ethan tossed his apple core into the trash with perfect aim. "You can still do community college for 2 years, then transfer. That's what smart people do anyway. Same degree, half the cost." The casual dismantling of my future, delivered through bites of fruit and scrolling thumbs, crystallized something I couldn't yet articulate. It wasn't just about money. It was about value. Whose dreams were worth investing in, whose potential warranted sacrifice. "The program starts next month," Dad continued, enthusiasm returning as he addressed Ethan. "We'll need to get you set up in San Francisco. The apartment we looked at near the incubator space should work perfectly." "An apartment?" "In San Francisco." My college fund wasn't just supplementing his business venture, it was funding a lifestyle upgrade. "I've been saving for college since I was 12, I said quietly. The birthday money from grandparents, summer jobs, babysitting funds, all religiously deposited into my personal savings account. "What about my savings?" "Those are still yours," Mom said quickly, relief evident that there was something positive to offer. "That's separate." I nodded, calculating rapidly. My personal savings might cover a semester at a state school if I lived at home and worked full-time. Not Reed. Never Reed. "Morgan will find her path," Dad said with manufactured confidence. "She's always been our practical one." Practical. The word landed like a consolation prize. In our family lexicon, practical was code for not special enough to warrant extraordinary measures. Ethan was visionary, bold, exceptional. I was practical, responsible, steady. That evening, alone in my room surrounded by college brochures that now seemed like cruel jokes, I created my first independent financial spreadsheet. If Reed was off the table, I needed alternatives. Community college, work study, loans I'd have to repay myself, scholarships requiring essays and perfect grades, a path that demanded I elevate myself while my brother was being elevated by others. I didn't yet understand that this moment, this family financial summit, was merely one iteration of a pattern that had shaped our family's dynamic since birth. The emotional mathematics that consistently calculated Ethan's potential as worth more than my proven performance. The next morning, I found a brochure for Portland Community College on my desk, Mom's attempt at helpful problem-solving. The gesture, well-intentioned but tone-deaf, cemented my resolution. I would find my own way forward, one that relied on no promises from people who had proven promises were conditional. What followed were 2 years of dual existence. Outwardly, I maintained the role of supportive sister and dutiful daughter. I attended Ethan's launch party in San Francisco, standing in the background while investors and mentors praised his vision, and my parents beamed with vicarious achievement. I nodded understandingly when holiday gifts became noticeably modest because everything extra is going into supporting Athlete Connect until it secures next-round funding. Inwardly, I transformed myself into a scholarship-hunting machine. I graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA, perfect SAT scores, and a portfolio of extracurriculars strategically selected to appeal to financial aid committees. When acceptance letters arrived, I spread them across my bed and calculated which offered the most viable financial package, not which fulfilled my academic dreams. Portland State University offered me a partial scholarship that, combined with my savings and a campus job, made education possible without loans. It wasn't Reed, but it had a respected psychology program, and most importantly, it was attainable through my own efforts. The day I moved into my dormitory, a utilitarian room shared with 2 other scholarship students, Ethan was featured in a regional tech magazine as a rising star in social media innovation. My parents framed the article and hung it in our foyer, just visible from the front door, ensuring no visitor could miss it. That fall established the rhythm of our family's new normal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sunday dinners became showcases for Ethan's latest developments, with occasional sympathetic inquiries about my psychology classes that never quite masked the hierarchy of interest. My academic accomplishments, dean's list, research assistant, position, departmental award, were acknowledged with the polite appreciation one might offer a child's refrigerator artwork. Meanwhile, Ethan's venture cycled through the familiar startup trajectory of promising metrics, scaling challenges, and perpetual need for additional investment. Each phase required more capital, more parental involvement, more family resources, diverted toward the golden opportunity that remained perpetually just around the corner. "We're extending our mortgage," Mom confided during my sophomore year, voice lowered though no one else was home. "Don't mention it to your father, he's under enough pressure." I found myself in the strange position of becoming my mother's confidant. Regarding financial concerns she couldn't share with her husband, concerns largely created by decisions he made with her consent. The irony wasn't lost on me, particularly as I juggled classes with 30 hours weekly at my campus job. By my junior year, I'd developed a specialty within psychology, focusing on family systems and financial trauma. My professors praised my research proposals connecting parental financial favoritism to identity development and achievement patterns in young adults. They didn't know I was essentially documenting my own experience with academic precision. Dr. Nora Chen, my research advisor, became the mentor I desperately needed. Unlike my parents, she recognized something in me worth nurturing. During late evenings analyzing data in the psychology lab, she shared stories of her own journey through academia against family expectations. "Your ability to observe patterns, while experiencing them, is remarkable," she told me after reading my research thesis proposal. "Most people need distance before achieving that clarity." Her validation was water in a desert, the first time someone had seen my perspective as valuable rather than merely practical. When she suggested I consider graduate programs, I didn't immediately dismiss the possibility as financially unattainable. Instead, I began researching fellowships and teaching assistantships that might make it possible. Meanwhile, Athlete Connect was hemorrhaging money. The initially promising user growth had plateaued after struggling to monetize. Competitor apps with better funding had emerged, implementing similar features with slicker interfaces. Ethan's incubator mentors grew increasingly distant, focusing on newer ventures with brighter prospects. I learned about these developments not from family announcements, but through crisis calls from my mother that became increasingly frequent during my senior year. "Your father's blood pressure is concerning," she confided during one such call. "The doctor says it's stress-related. I'm worried about him, Morgan." The pattern continued. Ethan's business troubles became health concerns for my parents, which became emotional responsibilities for me. I drove home weekends to help Mom while maintaining my course load and research position. During these visits, I couldn't help noticing the subtle changes in our family home: fewer new purchases, delayed repairs, the gradual downsizing of lifestyle that signaled financial strain. Yet Ethan's San Francisco apartment remained, his business expenses covered, his lifestyle subsidized. Even as the venture visibly faltered, the family mythology remained intact. Ethan was our special one, the investment worth any sacrifice. When I graduated with highest honors, my parents attended the ceremony, looking genuinely proud but noticeably tired. The celebration dinner afterward was at an affordable chain restaurant rather than the fine dining experience that had marked Ethan's high school graduation years earlier. "We have news," Dad announced over dessert, attempting festivity despite the shadows under his eyes. "Ethan has been approached by Innovate Tech about acquiring certain assets from Athlete Connect. It's not the outcome we initially envisioned, but it's a strategic consolidation." Mom nodded too enthusiastically. "It means he'll be coming back to Portland for a while to regroup and develop his next concept." Coming back meant moving home. Regrouping meant the venture had failed. Developing his next concept meant unemployment with no immediate prospects. The corporate euphemisms couldn't disguise the reality. "That's significant," I said carefully. "Will Innovate Tech's offer cover the outstanding investments?" My directness wasn't typical for our family dynamics, where financial realities were dressed in optimistic platitudes. Dad's slight flinch confirmed what I suspected. "The tech sector requires patience," he replied. "The experience and connections Ethan has gained are invaluable." Experience and connections wouldn't pay off a remortgaged house or replenish retirement accounts. They wouldn't restore my diverted college fund. But acknowledging this would collapse the narrative that had organized our family for years, that Ethan's potential justified any financial sacrifice. 2 weeks after graduation, I received the fellowship offer from UCLA's doctoral program in clinical psychology, a full scholarship plus stipend for serving as a teaching assistant. The validation extended beyond finances. A prestigious program believed my research and clinical potential warranted investment. That same week, Ethan moved back into his childhood bedroom, bringing expensive furniture that overwhelmed the space and a collection of meaningless awards from industry events that now seemed like participation trophies for a game he hadn't ultimately won. Our paths had crossed again, but with roles strangely shifted. I was leaving for graduate-level education funded by outside recognition of my abilities. He was returning to parental support after others had ceased to find his prospects compelling. The evening I announced my fellowship, my parents expressed pride tinged with what seemed like confusion, as if the script they'd been following had taken an unexpected turn. We ate dinner surrounded by Ethan's unpacked moving boxes, his absence from the table explained as networking with local contacts. "UCLA is offering everything?" Dad confirmed, reviewing the fellowship letter I'd brought home. "Tuition, housing stipend, health insurance?" "Everything," I said, "plus salary for teaching undergraduate sections." He nodded slowly, something calculating behind his eyes. "That's impressive, Morgan. Very efficient." Efficient. Another word from our family lexicon that classified my achievements not as exceptional, but as resourceful management of limited expectations. "We always knew you'd find your way," Mom added warmly, though her eyes kept darting to the ceiling where Ethan could be heard pacing in his room above us. "You've always been so self-sufficient. Self-sufficient, independent, practical." The coded language of our family that simultaneously praised me for requiring less while justifying giving less. "I'm wondering," Dad said, folding my fellowship letter with deliberate precision, "if you've considered staying in Portland for your doctorate instead? PSU has a program, don't they? It would be helpful for your mother, having you nearby while we navigate this transition period." The request hung in the air, its subtext unmistakable. My achievement was being reframed as an opportunity to support the family through the fallout of my brother's failure, the same failure funded by my sacrificed opportunities. I took a slow sip of water, buying time to steady my voice. UCLA's program is ranked in the top 5 nationally. Their specialty in family systems psychology directly aligns with my research focus. This fellowship is extremely competitive. Of course, Dad backpedaled. "We're just thinking practically about family support systems during transition periods." Family support systems. The irony was painful. Where was this concern for support systems when my educational fund was redirected? Where was this family-first thinking when I worked 30-hour weeks alongside full-time studies? "I've accepted the position," I said firmly. "Orientation starts August 15th. The slight widening of my father's eyes confirmed my suspicion. He had expected me to accommodate, to adjust, to sacrifice, as I always had. My straightforward refusal represented a deviation from the pattern so established it had become invisible to them. That night, I overheard my parents' muffled conversation through the heating vent that had served as my household intelligence network since childhood. "Can't expect her to change her plans," Mom was saying. "This is a remarkable opportunity." "I'm not suggesting permanently," Dad replied. "Just deferring a year. We need to stabilize things here first. The second mortgage, Ethan's credit card situation. She doesn't know about those details. Maybe she should. She's always been..." The practical one thinks clearly under pressure. Ethan's still processing the emotional impact of the company transition. Company transition, more euphemism for complete business failure. "She's worked so hard for this fellowship," Mom said, her voice uncharacteristically firm. "We've already asked too much." The acknowledgement, the first I'd ever heard that recognized the imbalance, caught me off guard. A tear slid down my cheek, unexpected and unwelcome. "What choice do we have?" Dad's voice had dropped lower, tension evident. "The credit card. Companies are calling daily. The business loans are in our names." Business loans, multiple credit cards. The financial picture was clearly worse than I'd understood. I pulled my laptop closer, opening the folder where I tracked family patterns with the same methodical precision I applied to research data. This conversation represented new information, requiring updates to my assessment. The next morning, Ethan finally appeared at breakfast, looking remarkably unaffected by his business collapse. He poured himself coffee in the designer mug he'd brought from San Francisco and scrolled through his phone with the same nonchalance he'd displayed years ago while consuming my college future. "UCLA, huh?" he said without looking up. "Good. Program. Expensive city, though." "I have a full fellowship," I replied, buttering toast with deliberate precision. "Smart," he nodded. "Wish I'd gone the institutional route sometimes. Corporate partnerships can be brutal." Corporate partnerships. Another euphemism for the family money that had funded his venture. How much did Athlete Connect end up costing? I asked directly, something unprecedented in our family's careful conversational choreography. His scrolling paused momentarily. "It's complicated. The asset valuation versus cash investment metrics operate on different..." "Ballpark figure?" I interrupted. He glanced up, seemingly noticing me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. "You've changed. Education does that. Numbers?" He set his phone down. "Why does it matter now?" "Because I'm trying to understand why Dad wanted me to defer UCLA to stay here and help with the family transition period." Ethan's expression shifted subtly, surprise, followed by calculation. "They asked you to stay?" "Last night," mentioned second mortgages and credit card situations. Something like genuine concern crossed his face. "It's worse than they've told you. The house equity line, personal loans for business development, credit cards for temporary operational expenses, Dad's retirement account." Each item landed like a stone. "And your personal contribution to covering these expenses?" He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I've got some promising conversations happening with venture capitalists about my next concept, a completely different approach to social connectivity." The pattern reasserted itself with painful clarity. Another concept, more promising conversations. The cycle preparing to repeat with my parents once again positioned as financial backup. "How much, Ethan?" I pressed. "Total family investment in Athlete Connect." He sighed, resignation replacing his usual confidence. "About 300,000, plus the San Francisco apartment overhead." The number struck me physically, a sensation like stepping off a curb that wasn't there. $300,000. My diverted college fund had been merely the beginning, the first sacrifice in years of financial hemorrhaging. Does your next concept require family investment? I asked, already knowing the answer. Initial seed funding only, he replied, slipping back into pitch mode. Just enough to develop the prototype to demonstrate to investors? Just enough. The same promise that had started this cycle years ago. I stood, gathering my breakfast dishes. I leave for UCLA in 6 weeks. I suggest you develop a different funding strategy. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a text notification. Dad, need to discuss important family financial matters tonight. Your input is valuable. 7 p.m. Family financial matters. My input. The calculated appeal to my sense of responsibility, my practical nature. In the past, I would have adjusted my plans, arrived promptly at 7 p.m., and offered sensible solutions that ultimately enabled the pattern to continue. I set my dishes in the sink and typed a response that would alter our family dynamic permanently. Can't make it. Graduate housing paperwork deadline this week, taking care of my future. Then I silenced my phone, packed my overnight bag, and drove back to my apartment near campus. The family pattern had held for 22 years, but patterns can be broken when someone refuses to play their assigned role. 6 weeks later, I loaded my modest possessions into my used Honda for the drive to Los Angeles. My parents had made multiple attempts to schedule important family discussions that I had politely but firmly declined. Not from anger, but from the clear-eyed recognition that participation would change nothing except my own trajectory. The morning of my departure, I stopped by the family home to say goodbye. Mom hugged me tearfully, pressing a small envelope into my hand. "A little something to help with the move," she whispered. "I've been setting it aside from my personal account." Inside was $800 cash, a meaningful amount from her limited independent resources. The gesture represented something significant, a tiny rebellion against the pattern she had helped maintain. Dad seemed subdued, the confident financial advisor persona notably absent. "Call when you get there safely," he said, hugging me awkwardly. "And if you hear of any psychology research about midlife business transitions." The partial acknowledgement of reality was progress, however limited. Ethan presented me with an expensive leather portfolio embossed with my initials. "For your professional development," he explained, "when you're meeting with clients or whatever psychologists do." "Thank you," I said sincerely. The gift, while characteristic of his tendency toward premium gestures, showed a certain acknowledgement of my chosen path. As I pulled away from the curb, watching my family recede in the rearview mirror, I felt no triumph or vindication, only the quiet certainty that breaking patterns requires someone willing to endure the discomfort of disruption. My phone remained silent for the first 3 weeks of my UCLA orientation. Then, on a Tuesday evening while I was organizing research materials in my graduate housing apartment, my father's number appeared on my screen. The symposium invitation represented a remarkable evolution in my family's approach to my academic work. Throughout my educational journey, my research had been categorized as an individual pursuit, intellectually acknowledged but practically peripheral to real family concerns. This reframing, positioning my scholarship as centrally relevant to meaningful professional discourse, signified substantial recalibration in how my contributions were valued within our family system. After consulting with Dr. Rivera about the professional appropriateness of presenting preliminary findings in this context, I accepted the invitation with specific parameters regarding the academic integrity of my presentation. The symposium would occur during spring break, allowing participation without disrupting my doctoral program responsibilities. In the weeks leading up to this event, my communication with family members maintained the restructured patterns that had emerged since the financial crisis. My mother shared updates about her increasing professional responsibilities at the accounting firm, where her organized approach and ethical clarity had earned rapid advancement beyond her re-entry position. My father provided progress reports, on their financial restructuring, now framed as collaborative planning rather than authoritative management. Ethan occasionally messaged about workplace developments and roommate dynamics, his communications notably free from implied resource requests or expectation of response. The family video calls continued monthly, each revealing subtle but significant evolutions in interaction patterns. My parents increasingly engaged with my research substance rather than its practical applications, asking thoughtful questions about methodology and theoretical frameworks. Ethan demonstrated growing self-awareness about his participation in previously problematic family dynamics, occasionally offering insightful observations about patterns he recognized in workplace relationships that paralleled our family system. When spring break arrived and I flew to Portland for the symposium, the contrast with my previous visit 6 months earlier was immediately apparent. My mother met me at the airport projecting confident professional presence rather than caregiving solicitude. Her conversation during the drive to their condominium focused on the symposium's professional networking opportunities and the relevant connections she had arranged with financial psychology practitioners interested in my research applications. The condo itself revealed continuing evolution in my parents' lifestyle recalibration. The space was modest but thoughtfully arranged, with efficiency prioritized over impression management. My father's home office occupied a small converted dining area, his previously extensive business library reduced to carefully selected essential references. The guest accommodation was minimal but functional, a convertible sofa in the small second bedroom that doubled as my mother's workspace. "We've adapted to intentional minimization," my father explained as he helped settle my belongings, distinguishing between necessary functionality and habitual accumulation. The observation represented significant departure from his previous approach to physical environment, where expansive space and premium furnishings had symbolized achievement and status within carefully cultivated professional narrative. That evening, as we discussed symposium logistics over a simple home-cooked meal, my mother shared an unexpected development. "We've been implementing elements from your research framework in financial advising contexts," she explained, referencing my family financial psychology studies, particularly regarding differential investment patterns and their relationship to implicit value hierarchies. "How are you applying those concepts practically?" I asked, curious about translation between academic theory and professional application. "We've developed assessment protocols identifying unconscious resource allocation biases," my father explained, his engagement with theoretical concepts continuing to surprise me, particularly in family business contexts and intergenerational wealth transfer planning. "The integration of psychological pattern recognition with financial planning represents significant advancement beyond traditional approaches," my mother added. "Conventional methods address technical considerations while overlooking underlying valuation systems that influence implementation effectiveness. Their sophisticated engagement with my research concepts, extending beyond intellectual acknowledgement to practical application within professional contexts, represented remarkable evolution in how they positioned my academic work within meaningful contribution frameworks." The following morning, Ethan unexpectedly joined us for breakfast before the symposium, arriving at the condo with coffee and pastries from a local bakery. His appearance had continued evolving away from the carefully curated entrepreneur aesthetic toward simpler professional presentation. Business casual attire appropriate for his marketing firm position rather than the premium styling that had characterized his San Francisco period. "Thought I'd wish you luck before your presentation," he explained, distributing coffee with surprising attentiveness to individual preferences, "and see if you needed help with materials or logistics." The practical support offer focused on facilitating my professional presentation rather than centering his needs or experiences, provided another data point in his continuing interaction pattern modifications. "That's thoughtful," I acknowledged, accepting the coffee prepared exactly as I preferred. "I'm feeling prepared, but I appreciate the support." Morgan's research connections with financial planning have catalyzed interesting professional discussions, my father commented, including Ethan in the conversation while maintaining focus on my work rather than redirecting attention to other concerns. "I've been reading some of the articles you shared," Ethan responded, surprising me with this unsolicited engagement with my academic work. "The intergenerational wealth psychology material is particularly relevant to patterns I'm noticing in marketing contexts, how spending behaviors reflect implicit status hierarchies and identity constructions." His substantive engagement with theoretical concepts, connecting academic frameworks to practical observations rather than dismissing scholarly work as abstractly irrelevant, represented significant evolution beyond his historical positioning regarding intellectual pursuits. As we prepared to leave for the symposium venue, Ethan mentioned he would attend if I was comfortable with his presence. "I understand if you'd prefer professional separation," he added with unexpected sensitivity to potential boundary considerations. "It's your academic presentation, not a family event." The acknowledgement of appropriate boundaries, recognizing my presentation as professional achievement rather than performance for family consumption, demonstrated continuing development of perspective beyond self-centered framing. "You're welcome to attend," I assured him, recognizing that his interest represented meaningful evolution in how he engaged with my professional identity. "The content connects with your marketing observations, and diverse professional perspectives enhance discussion quality." The symposium itself exceeded my expectations in both attendance and engagement quality. Approximately 60 financial professionals, family business consultants, and psychology practitioners gathered in the hotel conference facility, creating interdisciplinary dialogue opportunities rarely available in strictly academic contexts. My presentation on family financial psychology, specifically addressing how resource allocation reflects and reinforces implicit value hierarchies, generated thoughtful questions and substantive discussion. Several financial advisors shared practice observations that aligned with my theoretical framework, providing valuable field validation for concepts developed primarily through academic research methodology. Most surprising was the professional engagement demonstrated by my family members during the event. My mother contributed insightful observations about gender-differentiated investment patterns she'd documented through her accounting practice. My father asked substantive questions about methodology that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of research design considerations. Even Ethan participated thoughtfully, offering relevant examples from marketing contexts that paralleled family resource allocation patterns in consumer behavior settings. Their collective engagement, focused on substantive content rather than performative support, represented significant evolution in how my academic work was positioned within family interaction dynamics. Rather than peripheral individual pursuit tolerated but minimized, my research was being engaged as centrally relevant to meaningful professional discourse across multiple application domains. During the networking reception following presentations, a senior family business consultant approached our small group with particular interest in the practical applications of my research framework. "Your integration of psychological pattern recognition with financial decision analysis addresses critical gaps in conventional advising approaches," she noted, her professional credibility evident in both presentation and substantive engagement, particularly regarding unconscious value hierarchies that influence resource distribution across generations. "Morgan's research has substantially influenced our own practice evolution," my father acknowledged, positioning my work as professionally consequential rather than academically interesting but practically peripheral, particularly regarding differential investment patterns and their relationship to long-term family system stability. "We've implemented assessment protocols based on these frameworks," my mother added, referencing practical applications derived from my theoretical concepts. "The results have been transformative for several family business clients navigating succession planning challenges. Their positioning of my research, as centrally relevant to meaningful professional practice rather than abstractly interesting, but practically subordinate, represented remarkable recalibration in how my academic contributions were valued within family narrative frameworks." More surprising was Ethan's participation in this professional discourse. Rather than redirecting attention toward his experiences or minimizing scholarly perspectives as abstractly irrelevant, he engaged substantively with conceptual applications while appropriately acknowledging limitations in his expertise. The parallels with consumer psychology are particularly striking, he observed when the conversation turned toward marketing implications. Though I should clarify, I'm approaching this from practitioner perspective rather than research framework. His appropriate positioning, contributing relevant observations while recognizing expertise boundaries, demonstrated continuing evolution beyond self-centered interaction patterns toward collaborative discourse engagement. As the symposium concluded and we returned to my parents' condominium that evening, the conversation maintained this recalibrated engagement with my academic work, discussing application implications, methodology considerations, and potential research extensions with substantive interest rather than obligatory acknowledgement. Your presentation generated significant implementation questions from practitioners, my mother noted, as we shared a simple dinner in their modest dining area, particularly regarding assessment protocols for identifying unconscious allocation biases in family business contexts. The integration of psychological pattern recognition with financial planning represents substantial advancement beyond conventional approaches, my father added, his engagement with theoretical concepts continuing to reflect evolved perspective regarding academic contribution. The interdisciplinary connections seemed particularly valuable, Ethan observed, maintaining his unexpected engagement with scholarly discourse. Practitioners from different domains recognizing parallel patterns without shared terminology until your framework provided conceptual integration. Their collective positioning of my research as professionally consequential rather than academically interesting but practically subordinate represented significant recalibration in how my academic work was valued within family narrative frameworks. Later that evening, after Ethan had returned to his apartment and my parents had retired to their bedroom, I reviewed presentation notes while processing the day's interactions from both professional and personal perspectives. The family system reorganization, documented over preceding months, had manifested in especially visible ways during this symposium context, with interaction patterns consistently reflecting recalibrated valuation of my academic contributions within meaningful professional frameworks. The following morning, my father suggested breakfast at a local cafe before my afternoon flight back to Los Angeles. The location, a modest neighborhood establishment rather than the premium venues he had previously favored for family occasions, represented another manifestation of their lifestyle recalibration following financial restructuring. As we settled into a corner table with coffee and simple breakfast options, he raised an unexpected topic. I've been reflecting on differential investment patterns through a longitudinal framework, he began, referencing concepts from my research, particularly regarding cumulative impact on development trajectories. The engagement with theoretical concepts without practical application focus represented continuing evolution in how he positioned academic frameworks within meaningful discourse. What specific patterns have you been considering? I asked, curious about his independent engagement with these concepts beyond direct family application. The compound effects of early resource allocation decisions on subsequent opportunity structures, he explained, surprising me with sophisticated conceptual integration, not just immediate educational access, but cascading implications for professional network development, credential accumulation, and advancement pattern acceleration. His articulation, identifying systemic rather than isolated impacts of resource distribution decisions, suggested meaningful engagement with my research beyond superficial acknowledgement or crisis-prompted reflection. The early diversion of your college fund represents more significant trajectory modification than I previously recognized, he continued, establishing direct connection between theoretical concepts and our family's specific history. Not merely delaying educational attainment but potentially altering entire professional development pathways. The acknowledgement, specific, direct and focused on systemic implications rather than isolated impact, represented significant evolution beyond previous framing that had minimized long-term consequences of resource reallocation decisions. The Educational Advancement Fund we established represents inadequate compensation for opportunity structure modification, he added, referencing their modest financial contribution from downsizing proceeds. I've been investigating supplemental approaches within current resource constraints. While the practical impact of this investigation remained unclear, the conceptual reframing, acknowledging systemic rather than isolated consequences of previous decisions, represented meaningful evolution in how resource allocation patterns were understood within our family system. As my mother joined the conversation after briefly taking a work call, she introduced another dimension to this recalibration discussion. We've been implementing structured documentation protocols for family financial decisions, she explained, creating transparent record-keeping regarding resource allocation rationales and distribution patterns. What prompted that specific approach? I asked, recognizing connections with accountability mechanisms referenced in family systems literature. Recognition that undocumented decision patterns facilitate unconscious bias perpetuation, she explained with surprising conceptual sophistication. Without structured documentation, retrospective justification often replaces contemporaneous reasoning, obscuring actual valuation hierarchies guiding resource distribution. The insight, identifying how documentation absence enables pattern maintenance through selective memory and retrospective rationalization, demonstrated remarkable engagement with systemic concepts beyond superficial acknowledgement or crisis-prompted reflection. We're attempting to implement practical accountability structures rather than relying solely on awareness or intention, my father added, referencing implementation mechanisms rather than merely conceptual recognition. Creating system modifications that persist beyond immediate perspective shifts or circumstantial adjustments. Their approach, focusing on structural changes rather than solely attitudinal adjustments, aligned with research findings suggesting sustainable system transformation required both conceptual recognition and practical implementation to maintain recalibrated patterns against gravitational pull of established dynamics. As our conversation continued through breakfast and the drive to the airport, their engagement with these concepts remained substantive rather than performative, demonstrating genuine integration of modified understanding into practical approaches, rather than strategic demonstration for temporary approval. At the airport departure area, my mother surprised me with an unexpected observation. Your research provided essential framework for understanding patterns we couldn't recognize while embedded within them, she said, echoing language from their earlier letter accompanying the Educational Advancement Fund documentation. But your boundary establishment catalyzed actual system reorganization by disrupting accommodation patterns that maintained problematic dynamics. The insight, recognizing that theoretical understanding alone had proven insufficient until practical interaction modifications disrupted established patterns, demonstrated sophisticated engagement with systems concepts beyond intellectual acknowledgement to practical implementation understanding. The financial crisis created disruption opportunity, my father added, but your maintained boundaries prompted sustainable recalibration rather than temporary adjustment, followed by pattern reestablishment. Their acknowledgement, positioning, my boundary maintenance as constructive system intervention rather than relationship disruption, represented significant evolution in how individual autonomy was valued within family interaction frameworks. As I prepared to enter the security checkpoint, Ethan unexpectedly arrived, slightly breathless from apparent hurrying. Almost missed saying goodbye, he explained, joining our small group with appropriate respect for the established conversation, rather than centering his late arrival. I wanted to share something before you return to UCLA, he continued, withdrawing an envelope from his jacket pocket. Documentation you might find relevant for your research. The envelope contained a simple spreadsheet and accompanying letter, The spreadsheet detailed systematic repayment installments from his entry-level marketing salary into the educational advancement fund our parents had established. Modest monthly contributions representing significant percentage of his limited income directed toward partial restoration of resources previously diverted from my educational opportunities to his business ventures. The accompanying letter acknowledged that these contributions represented symbolic, rather than equivalent compensation for opportunity structure modifications resulting from early resource allocation decisions. However, the systematic approach, establishing structured repayment process rather than emotional acknowledgement without practical implementation, demonstrated meaningful engagement with accountability concepts beyond intellectual recognition to behavioral modification. This doesn't address systemic impacts, he acknowledged as I reviewed the documentation, but represents commitment to pattern interruption through practical implementation rather than solely conceptual recognition. His approach, focusing on behavioral modification rather than merely attitudinal adjustment, aligned with research findings regarding sustainable pattern transformation requiring practical implementation beyond theoretical understanding. As I thanked him for this unexpected initiative, he added an observation that demonstrated surprising insight development. The business failure created crisis-prompted reflection opportunity, but your consistent boundary maintenance provided essential pattern interruption mechanism. Without your modified participation, the system would likely have re-established familiar dynamics despite temporary adjustments. The acknowledgement, recognizing my boundary establishment as constructive intervention rather than relational withdrawal, represented significant evolution in how individual autonomy was valued within family interaction frameworks. As I boarded my flight back to Los Angeles, I felt a strange mixture of academic satisfaction and personal validation. The family system that had once devalued my academic pursuits was now not only acknowledging them, but actively integrating them into their professional lives. The patterns that had once seemed immutable were proving remarkably adaptable when confronted with both financial necessity and psychological insight. Back at UCLA, Dr. Rivera noticed the change in my demeanor during our next advisement meeting. "The symposium experience appears to have been professionally affirming," she observed as we reviewed my presentation materials. "It provided valuable interdisciplinary validation," I acknowledged. "Practitioners from diverse fields recognizing pattern applicability beyond academic contexts." "And the family dynamics component?" she asked perceptively, aware of the personal connections underlying my research focus. "Evolving in unexpected ways," I admitted. "The theoretical frameworks aren't just being acknowledged, but actively implemented in both professional and personal contexts." Dr. Rivera smiled slightly. "Family systems often demonstrate remarkable adaptability when equilibrium disruption becomes unavoidable. Your research is simultaneously documenting and facilitating that process, a unique integration of academic inquiry and lived experience." As the semester progressed toward conclusion, my communication with my family maintained its restructured patterns. My mother shared developments regarding their continued financial recovery, now consistently framed as collaborative planning rather than crisis management. My father occasionally forwarded relevant articles connecting psychological frameworks with financial planning approaches, his engagement with interdisciplinary concepts demonstrating genuine integration rather than strategic performance. Ethan's updates about his professional development remained refreshingly free from implied resource requests or obligation creation. 2 months after the symposium, I received an unexpected email from a senior editor at the Journal of Financial Psychology, the field's leading publication connecting economic behavior with psychological frameworks. The editor had attended my symposium presentation and expressed interest in a potential article developing the theoretical concepts I'd presented, particularly regarding unconscious value hierarchies in family resource allocation. "Your integration of psychological pattern recognition with practical financial applications addresses significant gaps in current literature," the editor noted. We would welcome submission exploring these frameworks for our special issue on intergenerational wealth psychology. The professional recognition, coming from the field's preeminent publication rather than family-generated affirmation, provided external validation of both my research direction and the substantive contribution potential identified during the symposium. After consulting with Dr. Rivera regarding publication strategy within my doctoral program timeline, I began developing the article, expanding methodological frameworks while maintaining focus on practical implementation mechanisms. As summer approached, bringing intensified research opportunities through reduced teaching responsibilities, I received another unexpected communication, this time from the foundation that had provided my graduate fellowship. The program director was assembling a panel on emerging psychological approaches to financial behavior for their annual conference, and requested my participation presenting preliminary research findings alongside established scholars in the field. Your innovative integration of family systems theory with resource allocation analysis represents valuable contribution to emerging discourse, the director explained in her invitation. The panel would provide platform for connecting these frameworks with policy implications beyond academic and clinical applications. The recognition, positioning my research as centrally relevant to meaningful policy discussions rather than peripherally interesting academic exploration, represented significant external validation beyond family-generated affirmation or isolated symposium engagement. After confirming appropriate timeline alignment with my doctoral program requirements, I accepted the invitation with specified presentation parameters regarding preliminary findings disclosure. 3 days later, Ethan called with news of his own. "I've been promoted," he announced without preamble when I answered. "Junior account manager, modest advancement but meaningful progression from entry-level position." "That's excellent," I responded, genuinely pleased by his professional development, independent of family support structures. "What does the new role involve?" "Smaller client portfolio management and team coordination responsibilities," he explained. "Still firmly middle management territory, but represents legitimate skill recognition rather than title inflation common in startup contexts." His framing, emphasizing authentic merit recognition rather than inflated positioning, demonstrated continuing evolution beyond status-focused valuation toward substantive achievement assessment. More significant was his next disclosure. "I've adjusted the educational fund contribution calculation to reflect increased income capacity. The revised payment structure accelerates partial restoration timeline while maintaining reasonable budget parameters. The approach, proactively restructuring repayment process based on improved financial capacity without external prompting, represented meaningful engagement with accountability concepts beyond crisis-prompted adjustment to ongoing commitment, despite improved circumstances." "That's thoughtful," I acknowledged, recognizing the symbolic significance beyond financial impact given the necessarily modest contribution amounts relative to originally diverted resources. "It's appropriate implementation of concepts I've been considering since our symposium discussions," he replied, "particularly regarding compound effects of early resource allocation decisions on subsequent opportunity structures. The systematic repayment doesn't address cascading impacts, but represents commitment to pattern interruption through consistent practical acknowledgement." His engagement with theoretical concepts, connecting academic frameworks to personal accountability beyond superficial reference, demonstrated remarkable evolution beyond self-centered framing toward systemic understanding of resource allocation, patterns, and their long-term implications. As summer research activities intensified and panel presentation preparation proceeded, my parents proposed an unexpected collaborative project, developing an educational module integrating financial psychology concepts with practical planning approaches for their professional networks. "Your research frameworks address critical implementation gaps in conventional advising approaches," they explained in their thoughtfully structured proposal. "Translating these concepts into practitioner-accessible formats would facilitate broader application across diverse professional contexts, The invitation, positioning my academic expertise as practically valuable beyond theoretical interest, represented continuing evolution in how they engaged with my professional contributions. After careful consideration regarding appropriate boundaries between family relationship and professional collaboration, I agreed to content development consultation with clearly established parameters regarding time commitment and authorship expectations. The resulting educational module, integrating psychological pattern recognition with practical implementation mechanisms addressing unconscious bias in financial decision processes, generated substantive engagement from diverse professional audiences during initial presentation sessions. The feedback consistently highlighted the innovative bridging of conceptual understanding and practical application as particularly valuable for addressing implementation gaps in conventional approaches. This integration represents significant advancement beyond traditional frameworks, noted a senior financial advisor following one presentation session, particularly regarding assessment protocols for identifying unconscious allocation biases that influence long-term family system stability. The external validation, from field practitioners rather than family-generated affirmation, provided meaningful reinforcement for the restructured interaction patterns developing through our collaborative project. The successful integration of distinct expertise domains without hierarchical positioning or contribution devaluation demonstrated potential for healthy professional engagement within recalibrated relationship frameworks. As my doctoral research expanded through conference presentation opportunities and publication development, the parallel evolution of personal experience and professional inquiry created unexpected integration possibilities, transforming painful history into meaningful contribution through methodological application and analytical perspective. The emerging theoretical frameworks both informed and were informed by lived experience of pattern recognition and intentional restructuring, creating virtuous cycle between academic understanding and practical implementation within evolving family systems. 1 year after my father's initial crisis call requesting financial assistance with Ethan's business debt, I returned to Portland for a brief family visit before the Foundation conference presentation. The contrast with previous interactions was immediately apparent in both physical surroundings and relational dynamics. My parents' condominium, initially representing crisis-prompted downsizing, had evolved into thoughtfully organized space, reflecting intentional minimalism rather than reluctant accommodation. My father's home office contained carefully curated professional resources rather than status-signaling business displays. My mother's workspace demonstrated her expanding professional responsibilities through organized project materials rather than domestic management references. We've discovered unexpected benefits in recalibrated lifestyle dimensions, my father acknowledged as he prepared coffee in their modest kitchen, distinguishing between actual value components and habitual consumption patterns previously conflated with achievement signaling. The observation, identifying substantive versus superficial valuation frameworks, demonstrated continuing evolution beyond status-focused assessment toward meaningful value recognition independent of appearance management. Ethan joined us for dinner at a neighborhood restaurant offering quality experience without premium pricing, another manifestation of evolved assessment separating actual value from status signaling. His conversation throughout the evening maintained substantive engagement without dominance, appropriate interest without excessive inquiry, and notably absent self-referential redirection that had previously characterized family interactions. The panel presentation represents significant recognition of your research contribution, he observed when discussion turned toward my upcoming Foundation conference, particularly the policy implementation dimensions connecting psychological frameworks with institutional practices. His engagement, focused on substantive aspects rather than superficial elements or comparative reference, demonstrated continuing evolution beyond self-centered interaction patterns toward genuine, interest independent of personal positioning. As the evening concluded and we prepared to separate, each returning to our individual residences rather than gathering under shared family roof, My mother offered an observation that captured essential elements of our evolving system. The recalibrated connection patterns feel more authentically sustainable than our previous interaction frameworks. Independent development with meaningful engagement, rather than enforced proximity with superficial exchange. The insight, identifying qualitative rather than quantitative relationship dimensions as primary value metrics, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of system health parameters beyond conventional assessment frameworks focused on contact, frequency, or resource exchange volume. The following day, before departing for the foundation conference, I met Ethan for coffee at a small cafe near his apartment. The location, modest but comfortable, selected for convenience rather than impression management, represented another manifestation of his evolved valuation frameworks, separating substance from appearance. I've been reflecting on opportunity structure modification resulting from early resource allocation decisions, he said after initial pleasantries, surprising me with direct engagement of concepts typically avoided in our historical interactions, particularly regarding cumulative impact beyond immediate educational access limitations. His willingness to directly address painful history, rather than employing strategic avoidance or narrative reframing, demonstrated significant evolution beyond self-protective interaction patterns toward authentic engagement with consequential dynamics. The systematic repayment represents inadequate compensation for cascading opportunity modifications, he continued, acknowledging limitations without employing minimization strategies that had previously characterized accountability discussions. But I've been investigating supplemental approaches within developing capacity parameters. The investigation focused on accountability implementation rather than conceptual acknowledgement, aligned with research findings regarding sustainable pattern transformation requiring practical mechanisms beyond intellectual recognition or emotional expression. I've established professional development scholarship for first-generation college students at Portland Community College, he explained, revealing unexpected initiative beyond individual accountability measures. Modest funding capacity currently, but structured for incremental expansion as career progression permits increased contribution. The approach, extending beyond personal restoration toward systemic contribution, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of accountability dimensions, beyond direct compensation to include broader pattern interruption through constructive alternative establishment. That's meaningful implementation, I acknowledged, recognizing substantive engagement with accountability concepts beyond symbolic gesture. It represents attempt at pattern interruption through practical mechanism rather than solely conceptual. Acknowledgement, he agreed, echoing research terminology that demonstrated genuine engagement with theoretical frameworks beyond superficial reference. The scholarship doesn't address our specific history, but establishes alternative resource allocation pattern prioritizing demonstrated achievement over speculative potential. His articulation, identifying core pattern modification rather than surface-level adjustment, suggested remarkable evolution beyond crisis-prompted reaction toward intentional system recalibration based on recognized value frameworks. As we prepared to separate, me for the foundation conference, him for client meetings, Ethan offered an observation that captured essential elements of our personal evolution within the broader family system restructuring. The financial crisis created forced reconsideration opportunity, but your consistent boundary maintenance provided essential pattern interruption mechanism. Without your modified participation, we would likely have re-established familiar dynamics despite temporary circumstances adjustment. The acknowledgement, positioning my boundary establishment as constructive intervention rather than relational rejection, represented significant recalibration in how individual autonomy was valued within family interaction frameworks. The Foundation Conference panel provided platform for connecting my research on family financial psychology with broader policy implications beyond academic and clinical applications. The presentation, positioning unconscious value hierarchies as critical factors influencing resource allocation patterns across institutional and family systems alike, generated substantive engagement from diverse professional audiences representing academic, policy, and practitioner domains. Your integration of psychological pattern recognition with practical implementation mechanisms addresses critical gaps in conventional approaches, noted a senior policy advisor during the discussion period. Particularly regarding assessment, protocols identifying unconscious bias patterns that influence resource distribution across generations. The professional recognition, positioning my research as centrally relevant to meaningful policy discourse rather than peripherally interesting. Academic exploration provided external validation beyond family-generated affirmation or isolated engagement contexts. The substantive questions and implementation inquiries demonstrated genuine field interest in theoretical frameworks developed through integration of personal experience and academic methodology. As I returned to UCLA following these professional engagements, I carried evolving understanding of both family system recalibration and theoretical framework development. The parallel processes, personal history informing academic inquiry, while research findings facilitated family pattern recognition, created unique integration opportunity connecting lived experience with meaningful contribution through methodological, application, and analytical perspective. Dr. Rivera noted this integration during our subsequent advisement meeting, observing the strengthened connection between theoretical development and practical application evident in my updated research documentation. Your framework increasingly bridges conceptual understanding and implementation mechanisms, she observed, addressing the critical gap between pattern recognition and sustainable system transformation that limits conventional intervention approaches. As my doctoral program progressed through comprehensive examinations toward dissertation development, my family's evolved communication patterns maintained consistency rather than reverting toward historical dynamics despite varying interaction, frequency, and intensity during concentrated academic periods. The established rhythms continued with appropriate engagement without excessive inquiry, meaningful connection without obligation creation, and notably, balanced exchange without dominance. Patterns that had previously characterized family interactions. The sustained nature of these modified patterns, persisting beyond initial crisis adjustment through multiple seasonal cycles, significant professional developments, and varying contact intensities, suggested durable system recalibration rather than temporary accommodation responsive to specific circumstances. The structural modifications established during initial restructuring, transparent documentation protocols, balanced communication approaches, appropriate boundary recognition, and equitable contribution valuation became increasingly integrated into normalized interaction frameworks rather than consciously maintained departures from default patterns. Most significantly, the mutual professional respect developed through collaborative projects and interdisciplinary engagement created foundation for relationship reconfiguration based on genuine contribution recognition rather than hierarchical positioning or obligatory acknowledgement. The evolved interaction patterns, substantive engagement without dominance, appropriate interest without intrusion, meaningful connection without obligation, provided sustainable framework for continuing development toward healthier relationship. Configurations beyond crisis-prompted adjustment. The family system reorganization catalyzed by financial crisis had extended through multiple evolution phases, from emergency response to pattern recognition to structural modification to sustainable recalibration. The transformation remained necessarily incomplete and continuously developing rather than perfectly achieved, with occasional regression toward familiar dynamics during stress periods or habitual interaction contexts. However, the demonstrated capacity for pattern recognition, intentional modification, and sustained implementation suggested meaningful evolution potential beyond temporary accommodation. The family system had developed not just awareness of problematic patterns, but structural approaches maintaining recalibrated dynamics against gravitational pull of established interaction frameworks, creating foundation for continuing development toward healthier relationship configurations independent of specific circumstances. The journey that began with my college fund diversion to my brother's failed business venture had traversed territory I could never have anticipated that day. In our living room when my parents announced their investment decision, the path from that moment of bewildered hurt to my current position, presenting research at prestigious conferences, publishing in respected journals, and developing theoretical frameworks that meaningfully contributed to both academic understanding and practical implementation, demonstrated remarkable system adaptation capacity when established patterns face sufficient disruption force. Yet, the most significant evolution wasn't in professional achievement metrics or financial restoration attempts, but in the fundamental recalibration of how value was recognized and resources allocated within our family system. The transformation from unconscious patterns, privileging speculative potential over demonstrated achievement toward intentional frameworks, emphasizing equitable opportunity, structure development, represented genuine system reorganization beyond circumstantial adjustment. As I prepared my dissertation proposal focusing on transformative implementation mechanisms within family financial psychology, I recognized that my research wouldn't just document system reorganization, but continue facilitating it, creating a virtuous cycle between academic understanding and practical application through integration of methodological rigor and lived experience. The parallel evolution would continue informing both personal development and professional contribution, transforming painful history into meaningful impact through analytical perspective and implementation focus. My parents hadn't just given my college fund to my brother. They had unconsciously demonstrated value allocation patterns that privileged certain expressions over others, creating differential opportunity structures with cascading implications for developmental trajectories and achievement potential. Their subsequent financial crisis hadn't just revealed economic vulnerability, but catalyzed system reorganization opportunity through pattern disruption that made previously invisible dynamics unmistakably apparent. The $300,000 debt they eventually sought my help with represented more than financial mismanagement. It embodied the accumulated consequence of valuation systems that consistently directed resources toward speculative potential rather than demonstrated achievement until external reality finally enforced accountability impossible to avoid through narrative manipulation or strategic reframing. Their request for assistance with that debt hadn't just constituted financial appeal, but represented system maintenance attempt seeking pattern continuation through role reinforcement, positioning me as responsible problem solver while preserving preferential resource allocation frameworks that had created the crisis. My boundary establishment hadn't just protected graduate school viability, but interrupted accommodation patterns that had maintained problematic dynamics, despite intellectual recognition of their problematic nature. The system reorganization that followed demonstrated remarkable evolution capacity when established patterns faced sufficient disruption force combined with conceptual frameworks facilitating pattern recognition beyond immediate circumstances. The transformation extended beyond financial restructuring to fundamental recalibration of how value was recognized, contributions acknowledged, and resources allocated within our family interaction dynamics. As our family continues navigating this evolving relationship landscape, the patterns established through crisis-prompted recalibration provide foundation for healthier interaction frameworks, independent of specific circumstances or external pressures. The demonstrated capacity for pattern recognition, intentional modification, and sustained implementation suggests meaningful evolution potential beyond temporary accommodation toward genuine system transformation, reflecting equitable valuation, frameworks, and balanced resource allocation approaches. The journey continues developing through ongoing pattern refinement, occasional regression management, and continuing implementation reinforcement, an unfinished transformation requiring sustained commitment beyond initial adjustment. But the established direction provides hopeful indication that family systems can meaningfully evolve when sufficient disruption force combines with conceptual frameworks, facilitating pattern recognition beyond immediate circumstances toward Sustainable recalibration reflecting genuine value rather than habitual preference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.